Hello, everybody. My name's Ben Thrash. I'm a entomologist at the University of Arkansas Extension Service. I'm joined today with Brett Stewart. He's a new grower, and we're going to be talking to you a little bit today about. I'm going to talk to you about soybean insect management, and he's going to talk to us first about alternative farming practices due to necessity. All right.
Hey guys, I'm Brett Stewart. I'm from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I am a new, what some people call a young farmer. Currently, I'm 31 years old, and I did start farming on my own full time at the age of 27. And I kind of started from scratch, and so I'll kind of share a few things about how I got going from the beginning, and then share a few things about what I have learned in the process and improvements that I need to make moving forward in the future. So to begin with, I have a nice little family. You can see there on the screen myself, and I have 3 kids, and there's my wife there, and we all fit in the tractor barely. We're all growing, so we're not going to be able to fit in the tractor too much longer. But you can see there I'm from Pine Bluff down in southeast Arkansas, right on the edge of the Delta. A great place to farm, great place to enjoy wildlife and to raise a family. I got into farming, and my interest was piqued about farming when I was in college. I mean, I did not grow up on a farm. I did not grow up with family members who farmed. It was an interesting kind of way to get into farming. I needed a job as a young college student, and I was told that a guy by the name of Gus Lorenz might be hiring some student workers up in Lone Oak, and that's really how my intrigue in farming began. I got a job working for Gus, and I worked in his entomology program for 3 summers while I was in college. And it really piqued my interest in farming. Of course, we were working in entomology, studying a lot of things that had to do with insects and insecticides. I just learned a lot through that experience, and I wanted to learn more. I ended up changing my major from what was wildlife management to agriculture, and that started really my farming career. After I graduated from college, I did work for a private farmer as a crop consultant for a couple of years, 3 years, I think. And then I came back to the university as a program associate in entomology, working with Gus again and Dr. Nick Sider down at Monticello. And my farming interest remained high, and I really wanted to see if I could do it and to kind of dip my toes in the water and see if it was possible for me to do. Like I said, not having any family in the farming business, it was quite a task to try to just start from scratch. But I mean, we live in a great country, and the Lord was good to me, and is every day. And if you live in the United States of America and you really want to do something, if you really want to, you can do it. I mean, if you want to. That's really what happened to me. I just really wanted to see if I could farm from nothing, from scratch. And so I tried it. I got my hands on about 140 acres from the first year. This would have been in 2016. And I made some friends in the farming community, and they were very helpful, and I farmed 140 acres in 2016, kind of on the side. And then I kind of got my feet wet, and that started really my farming career. Let's go to the next one there.
Yeah, and you can see both me and Brett are in there.
Yeah. In this picture here, I'm in the blue shirt in the middle with the sunglasses, and then Ben is on the far left there in the gray shirt. Yeah, we were just young whippersnappers.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, like I said, I started small, just 140 acres of rice in 2016. I also had a full-time job really at the time, and so I really wanted to just see if it was something that I could do. I mean, farming's hard, and everybody has always told me that, and I'm Not going to say anything different because it absolutely is. I just wanted to see if I could do it. I've always been intrigued by farmers. I was always impressed with farmers growing up because they seemed to be the people who knew how to do everything. They could fix stuff. They could help you if you had a flat tire. I mean, they knew how to operate big equipment. They were always outside. They enjoyed wildlife. I was just like impressed with farmers, really, as a young person. And I thought that it was an honorable occupation. And that's kind of what I wanted to be a part of. So anyways, moving forward. I did start with 100 acres of rice there. I had zero equipment. I had nothing. I had my own F-150, and I borrowed my dad's four-wheeler. And you can see my dad's four-wheeler there in the picture. I mean, that's all that I had. I subcontracted all of my equipment, all of my tillage, from running the field cultivator to pulling levees. And then all the way into planting to drilling, all the way and all the way to harvest. Everything that I had, I borrowed it from somebody, or I rented it or leased it from someone for a really short term. And being young and really into the game, people were really nice to me. I mean, they were intrigued by the fact that I wanted to do this, and people were helpful. I mean, and I paid money for using their equipment, but they were gracious and let me use their stuff. And that's how I got through the year in 2016. It was fun. It was a crazy year because I did have a full-time job at the time, and I was also farming and didn't have very much equipment. So you can even see here in the picture that we homemade a little polypipe machine because I was growing rice, but I wanted to do some of the what is the irrigation method called where you lay the polypipe?
You just said it earlier.
Yeah, the side inlet irrigation.
Yeah.
I went blank there for a second. I wanted to do the multiple inlet irrigation. There we go.
There you go.
The multiple inlet irrigation. So in order to lay polypipe in the mud like this rice right here had already been planted actually. And but anyways, I knew that eventually I was going to have to lay polypipe, and I could do it in the mud without having too much equipment. If I did it like this, it worked really good. I mean, it works great. I actually took that idea of that little polypipe machine, and we actually built a much better polypipe machine that you pull behind a four-wheeler or side by side. And we actually lay a lot of pipe with that now. But anyways, at the time, that's what we did. That's how we laid our polypipe, and we did multiple inlet irrigation that first year in 2016. And I'm very thankful that all of my neighbors and people who were interested in helping me were gracious enough to help me and lend a hand and help me get started. And moving forward, once we got into 2017, you can probably go with that one there. The opportunities really came up for me to increase my acres. I had an opportunity to pick up a couple of farms that were really close to the 140 that I was already farming. I ended up, in just a matter of a few days, having the opportunity to pick up and be farming about 1,200 acres. And it was really all of a sudden, and it was kind of overwhelming, but I thought I may never get a chance to do this again. And if I don't take advantage of this situation, I may never have an opportunity to do this again. And so I did have a great relationship with my boss at the time. And I explained the situation, and we phased me out of my other job over time. And I started farming full time in 2017. We farmed 1,200 acres. I did hire an employee to help me that year. So me and one other guy farmed 1,200 acres. And it was mostly rice. I think we had 700 or 800 acres of rice that year. So for a small operation, over half of our acres were rice. It was quite an undertaking. I did get some help from, as far as loaning and financing was concerned. I did qualify for the startup loans and the beginning farmer stuff. It wasn't a bunch of free money out there, but I was able to get some financing that made the bank feel a little bit better about loaning me money. And so that was really, really helpful. I developed a relationship with my baker, and he had a lot of confidence that I at least was going to try hard. And so he was supportive of the idea, and so we moved forward. I did go out and I bought a lot of used equipment at auctions and this and that in the year 2017. Some of me regrets buying a lot of old used stuff because I wasn't a mechanic, and old stuff sometimes is someone else's problem and it breaks. And so I became a mechanic. I'm still not a very good one, but I have to work on some stuff.
Mechanic by necessity.
That's right, mechanic by necessity. The very first thing I ever purchased is pictured here. This is a Tiger Mate 2 field cultivator, 26-foot field cultivator I bought at an auction in the spring of 2017. The very first thing I ever purchased on the farm, and I still have it. That's still the only field cultivator that I have, and that's the one that we run, at Tiger Mate 2. In that first year, I did lease 2 Case tractors and a John Deere Combine 9770. I did get some advice from some people that it probably was going to be beneficial for me to lease my tractors and combine, and so I did go with that from the very beginning. That is still the way that I have operated until 2020. I did purchase a combine. I really couldn't turn the deal down. It's a really good deal. And so I did purchase a combine in 2020, and we just finished our first harvest with my John Deere 9870. But we still are a 2 tractor, 1 combine operation. We have moved up to about 2,000 acres. And so from 1,200 acres to 2,000 acres, we still have maintained just a two tractor, 1 combine operation. It's still, 2,000 acres is a large undertaking, but it's still, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small operation. And tractors are expensive. And so we have stuck with the 2 tractor, 1 machine strategy for now. And I'm sure that everyone would agree that there are times in the year where I could have like 8 tractors.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't feel like it was enough. But we are skimping by with 2 tractors and 1 combine. 1 combine is plenty to do 2,000 acres in a year if you're any efficient at harvest, which I've got to do a better job at doing. But 2 tractors sometimes puts me in a bind. I would like to go up to 3 tractors as soon as possible, as soon as the funds would be available. As soon as I can cash flow that, I can really see me going up to 3 tractors, and that would be beneficial. But that's just kind of where I have come from. The Lord has blessed me and my family, and we are going to do this as long as we can. We just got finished with 2020 season. Most of our crop is still in the grain bins, and all the signs are pointing towards we're going to get to do it again in 2021. And so we're excited about that. And we're going to go head towards 2021, make some plans, and most of all, make some improvements and see what we can do better in 2021. My talk is kind of derived from things that I have put into practice due to necessity. When I first got into farming, the conventional way of tillage is very popular, was very popular 5 years ago. It still is very popular now. And I started that because that's what my neighbors were doing. And my neighbors are good farmers. So like, they're doing it right. I mean, they're good farmers. I didn't have anything to compare it to because I wasn't a farmer. My dad was not a farmer. My grandparents were not farmers. But I learned very quickly that I was not getting things done on time. I was not getting things done in a timely manner. And sometimes it was taking me 3 or 4 trips across the field to get it prepared to plant. And so out of necessity, I just kind of threw my hands up and I said, we're going to just plant some of this stuff like it is. I don't regret that whatsoever. That has really helped my operation a ton. Is when it comes to tillage, taking the minimalist approach to tillage is as small or as less of a footprint as I can really get away with. I'm not, I mean, forgive me, but I'm not all worried about the carbon and the emissions and all that stuff. But if I go across the field fewer times, I can get things done quicker, and it saves me a ton of time. And I can do it with a little bit less cost, because I mean, it costs you money every time you go across the field, and I'm very aware of that. Of each trip across the field, you know, no matter what I'm doing with labor and fuel and whatever implement I'm pulling, you know, it's going to be $10 or $15 to go across the field. And so we do that 3 times. You know, we're sitting at $45 an acre. You know, maybe I don't have to spend that money. And so really out of necessity, I started dabbling in minimum till and no-till. And I have really enjoyed that experience so far. At the beginning, the screen here is about rice. So at the beginning, I was growing all paddy rice, levee rice, contour levees. When you get a stand of rice and you got everything going to flood, and your levees are all out there and they're going with the topography of the land, it is a beautiful picture if you want to take pictures. But for me, a 1-man and then my second year, a 2-man operation, it was an absolute ton of work. I mean, it was wearing me out to have 800 acres of rice all on levees, and I was watering rice. I mean, it just seemed like all day, every day, and that was the only thing I had time to do. And so moving into 2018, I said, I'm going to try some of this row rice stuff. And I have tried row rice in many situations where you pull the beds up with the disc hipper, and then you kind of knock them down with the do-all. And I have had success there. And I have done rice beds where you pull your beds up with a bedder roller and you put up a really shallow, wide bed. And I have had success with that. And the other thing I've had success with is just pulling just the row cultivator, what we normally would be using to plow the middles in soybeans or plow the middles in corn, and just do that on flat ground. Especially if the field doesn't have a whole lot of sidefall or something like that. If it's has a relatively you know, steady fall in one direction, planting the rice flat, pretty much just planting the rice flat on flat ground like you would normally do paddy rice or zero grade rice, and then having those furrows pulled, a small furrow. You really don't have a bed, you're just pulling a furrow every 38 inches. I farm on 38s, every 38 inches. Just as you would be plowing corn or soybeans, you know, working in fertilizer or something like that. I have had a lot of success. I would say a lot. I have had success. I've been comfortable doing all 3 of those. I really like, though, just pulling the middles, because you get a really good, you can see with the picture here, that was done in this picture. You get a really good soaking across whenever you water this rice. With the bed, you want a bed to be as shallow as you can, in my experience. But with almost no bed and just a furrow, that water really goes across the row, goes across the middle into the next row, and the water kind of filters itself down the field. And I have found that to be really beneficial in activating herbicides. Especially most of the time, I really like that when we're trying to activate a herbicide, because I feel like that we really get everything wet, and it doesn't take 7 days to flush across the field like it was doing for me before in levee rice. It wasn't taking me 7 days to get from water from the top. You got 20 or 30 levees in the field or whatever, and it's taking a stinking week to get all the way to the bottom. In row rice, there are disadvantages, but one of the advantages is in row rice, I mean, you're talking about 24 to 48 hours, depending on what kind of set you're running, and you're getting water across the field. I mean, I like that a lot. Yeah. Row rice really, for a small operation like mine, what I mean small, I mean a few workers, myself, 1 or 2 other people, a small operation like that, row rice has really been an advancement, in my opinion, on our operation. I like row rice. I'm going to continue to do row rice. There are going to be problems that arise. We are already having issues with bill bugs We already know that we are not as efficient with our nitrogen uptake. Some people are having more trouble with their herbicides and getting herbicides activated, maybe spending additional money to make an additional herbicide. I'll talk about that a little bit. I don't feel like I'm spending any more net dollars in my herbicide program on row rice. A couple of reasons. For one, as you can see in this picture here, when you turn the water on to activate a herbicide, in this situation that we're looking at right now, I mean, you're activating herbicide in a matter of hours instead of a matter of days, like I gave in the example a minute ago, trying to flush paddy rice for a long time. And so if we're doing it on time, which we don't always do, I don't always do, but if we're doing it right and we're doing it on time, then we can really activate our herbicides pretty quickly in row rice, especially in this type of a situation here. And that just allows us to do a better job of catching those weeds either before they emerge or while they're still really small, because so many times we make an application, a rice application on dry ground, and then we start flushing. I mean, we're not really getting any activity on those weeds on 2 or 3 leaf barnyard grass until it gets water on it, for example, or the plant is a little bit stressed and it's not really taking it up. I mean, it may have 4 or 5 leaves on it when we get water down there, and it makes that herbicide work really hard. And a lot of times it's a failure. A lot of times we don't get what we need out of the herbicide. It's a failure. So net dollars, I would say that we may make an extra application, but I'm trying to make 3 applications in a row rice crop and spend the same amount of money that I was. And what I may do is kind of split my command up or something like that, and not put it all out at one time, and kind of do it every 2.5 weeks to keep my weed pressure down, especially using my residuals to get me to that 5 leaf stage in row rice, where we really start hammering down on the nitrogen, and we start getting, you know, ground coverage from the rice lapping over. So in addition to that, not necessarily spending more net money on herbicides on my operation, and I'm no expert, but this has just been my experience. I'm not spending any more net dollars on the actual herbicide cost, but I am able to make 1 or 2 of those applications with my tractor, with a ground rig. Not in every field, not in every situation, but you know, it costs $625 or $650 an acre for an airplane to go across these fields. And so if I do it twice, I mean, I've saved myself $12, $13, maybe $14 an acre. And over the course of several hundred acres or 1,000 acres, I mean, that really helps. And I still spray with a tractor and a hooded sprayer, with a 40-foot, nothing special hooded sprayer, 15-gallon work, because that's where my mixing is the simplest, and that's where my tractor speed is the most comfortable, where I'm not beating everything up. And 15 gallons an acre is just a good number to get good coverage. And so I feel like I get pretty good activity when I'm using my ground rig, my regular wheel tractor, 40 foot at a time. So it's going to be about 12 rows at a time, 15-gallon work under a hood. If I can do that a couple of times, I feel like that I've saved $12 to $14 an acre on application cost. And I probably did a better job than an airplane can do. And airplanes can do a pretty good job, but with the hooded sprayer, I mean, you can do a pretty good job compared to what an airplane can do. So in the end, I've kind of beat this dead horse here. In the end, I don't think that my herbicide costs have increased.
There's your next slide.
There's my next slide. I have tried 3 different varieties on row rice. I've tried Gemini 214, Rice Tech 745, both of those being Clearfield varieties. And then just this past year, I went with Rice Tech 7301. All these did well on row rice. I don't have any complaints about them. Obviously, Gemini and 745 well, I don't know about 745 anymore, but Gemini and 745 being Clearfield varieties are going to be a little bit more expensive than the non-Clearfield varieties like 7301 or if you're growing 753 or something like that. So I specifically grew 7301 this year to save money. I mean, it was like, I think it's like $25 an acre savings to go with a non-Clearfield versus a Clearfield. I think I compared 7301 to Gemini 214, and it was a significant amount of money. It was like the difference between $150 an acre to $175 an acre for the seed at 22.5 pounds, if I remember correctly. It's somewhere in that range. I specifically went with 7301 to save that money. One of the other advantages that I found in row rice is that typically, if you are in a row rice system, you're not continuously in rice every year. So the years that I'm not in rice, I'm most likely going to be in soybeans in this situation. And last year, for example, if I was in soybeans and I was in a regular, Roundup situation, I mean, I'm really doing a good job taking care of my barnyard grass and springletop and all the other kind of grasses. I'm really kind of beating them in the head and giving myself a head start for the next year when I'm going to have rice. And so I did that about 2 years in a row, and I was seeing that I didn't really need the new path, the Clearfield technology, as often in the row rice situation when I was rotating it with soybeans. I know everybody probably already knows that, but I'm just giving a real world situation where it happened to me. And after a couple of years of doing this, I went non-Clearfield. I went with a non-Clearfield hybrid, and I did not have any trouble this year with bad resistance. I did not deal with bad, new path resistance, for example, where new path, well, that was a bad way to say it. I didn't have any problems where I was getting control with my new path, and then this year I was not using new path, and I was just using, propanil, bolero, facet command, and prowl, and those type of chemistries. I was still able to hold my weeds back like I need to do. And so that's another advantage of the row rice that I have had in my situation, is that if I'm going to be in row rice and I rotate it with soybeans, it just really helps, gives me a head start on my weed management program going into next year's rice. And I was able to save some money on the seed doing that. Obviously, in a row rice situation, the top of the field does not stay under a flood. I try to hold as deep of a flood as is reasonable at the bottom as I can. Not all of the fields have a pad, a perfectly good, turn row at the bottom of the field where I can hold a really deep flood. And in that situation, I'll try to pull a levee and I'll hold the flood as deep as I can at the bottom of the field. But where I can, I'll hold the flood as deep as is reasonable. You can see I started on this picture, I started pulling the water off. And there's still a little bit of water in the field. This is the very, very bottom of the field where the water is the deepest. And that water was like 18 inches deep, for most of the season. As soon as the rice got up to where it could withstand a lot of water, I just never let the water off. I mean, every time I watered it, it would get a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. And that cut some good rice. I mean, that was some good rice in that field. That was row watered rice. That picture, you can't tell it was row watered. I mean, maybe because of the angle, but the rice was healthy. It was a good field. The upper portion of the field was not under a consistent flood, but the bottom had like an 18-inch flood, and that allowed me to keep about a third of the field in a flooded situation, which that's what we want, in my opinion, in row rice. And another one of my bullet points here is bill bug. One of the things that we're running into that's going to be an issue, I see, and talking to Ben and Gus, we already know that it's happening, is we're going to be running into some bill bug problems in the row rice situation. So the more of the field that you can hold in a consistent flood, the less bill bug problems we're going to have. So I say hold it as deep as is reasonable. And in this situation, that's about 18 to 20 inches of water right there. And the rice could handle it perfectly fine. That rice stayed standing. Not all my rice stayed standing, but even that deep rice right there, that rice is really tall. that rice did stay standing all the way till harvest, and so it didn't give us any trouble there. I'm not saying that I'm a great farmer because I had a ton of rice that goes down, but this particular picture is a good example of tall rice that was just healthy, had everything it needed, had plenty of water. It got really tall because the water was deep, but it stayed standing until we cut it. And I do not do any automatic fungicides. I really try really hard to abide by good IPM, good integrated pest management. And so I have a scouting background, a crop consulting background. I got my start under people like Gus Lorenz. So it is not really in my DNA to do automatic applications. So I will only do automatic applications when it comes to fungicide in hybrid. And this isn't considered automatic. But this is when I have a history of kernel smut and fall smut. The previous year, a couple of years ago, I know that I had issues with kernel smut and fall smut. In that situation, I know that I need to make a fungicide application nearing the end of the boot stage, at the middle boot, the end of the boot stage, boot split, something like that, to combat the kernel smut and the fall smut. I have not had very much trouble out of sheath blight in the row rice system, not any more than anybody else would normally have. And typically our rice tick varieties handle sheath blight pretty well. And so that has been my lack of automatic treatments really in the row rice system. I do only apply these fungicides when necessary, when I have a history of kernel smut and fall smut. And the same thing goes with insecticides. You can go to the next slide. Corn has been my most challenging of the crops to phase into no-till. I have had trouble getting a uniform stand trying to straight up no-till corn with no specialized equipment. Many of you probably have already tried this, and I'm late to the game here. But I have tried to straight no-till corn in several situations, corn behind corn, corn behind soybeans. Corn behind corn was very difficult. Corn behind soybeans is better. You can see in this picture on the lower right-hand part of the screen, that's corn behind soybeans. I specifically cut the soybeans in this field last year with the row. You can see combine tracks there. I cut the soybeans with the row as opposed to at an angle like I would normally do. And I did that so that I could plant no-till corn behind this harvest pass and not have combine tracks going across the rows to deal with. Because in the past, the last couple of years, I have run into non-uniform stands whenever my old MaxEmerge 2 planter rolls over these combine tracks. And so that has been really my biggest challenge in phasing corn into a no-till system, because I'm not running with any special equipment. I'm running with old stuff that I bought in like auctions and stuff. And so this MaxEmerge 2, that's what I plant my corn with. And in a perfect straight bed, in a perfectly smooth bed, like, you know, kind of a good example there at the top of the screen, you know, I mean, you can get good seed placement and good stand uniformity. But if it's not perfect, which most of the time it's not, that old planter that I'm using can be challenging. And so I am working on either making improvements to my planter or possibly getting another planter that would be more conducive to minimum till or no-till. As you can see in the bottom right picture there, it did pretty good. I mean, that pass there was pretty good. It still wasn't perfect. I have flotation tires on my combine, so anytime that was relatively soft, that flotation tire kind of the cleats kind of messed up either side of the row that it was on. So it wasn't a perfect situation by any stretch. But stand uniformity in corn is really in this no-till system where I need to make the biggest improvement, I would say, I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. I haven't had any issue changing weed management strategies in corn. I am firmly under the conviction that when you don't disturb the soil, you don't have as many problems with palmer, with pigweed. I have seen it firsthand on my own farm with my own experiences, is the more I mess up the soil, then the bigger the flush, the more difficult it is to really maintain control of the pigweeds. And that really has made me want to try to figure out how I can no-till corn in a furrow irrigated system. I'll back up for a second. It's different when you're not in a furrow irrigated system because you can like scoot over a couple inches the next year if you're planting on flat ground.
Yeah.
You can scoot over a couple inches the next year and you have some fresh dirt to work with. But in a furrow irrigated system, which we are in, which I am in, you're going to be planting in the same spot year after year, and that gives you a few challenges that you have to deal with. You have to do something with last year's stubble. If anything, you have to give yourself, your planter, however new or however old it is, a smooth bed to work with so that your seed placement can be uniform, because I feel like that's really my biggest downfall. It is better to do let's see, what am I trying to say here? When I apply some fertilize, maybe in the early vegetative stages of the corn plant, I want to plow the middles for two reasons. Obviously to work in the fertilizer and to give me a better furrow for my water to go down when I start my polypipe irrigation. I know that is going to trigger some pigweeds to come up at that time. So, I mean, I have to be smart with making the herbicide application timely right after that. But what I have found out is that my plows will ball up on me if I'm trying to plow through a bunch of corn stubble. It doesn't do a great job when I'm trying to plow through a bunch of corn stubble. It does fine plowing through last year's soybean stubble. This bottom right picture here, that's corn, just no-till straight into last year's corn stubble. You get a year, several months of that field sitting by itself over the wintertime with nothing out there except for microbial activity. It's really doing a good job working that duff in the ground. The earthworms are doing their thing. And so after soybeans, I'm not having trouble plowing it. Plowing through corn stubble is a challenging thing that I have to work through, and I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. I do have a couple of things that I've implemented that I'll mention in a minute here. But plowing the middles is important in corn, I think, twofold. But it is definitely easier after a soybean crop compared to after a corn crop where you're dealing with all the duff. In soybeans, I had to say it's very forgiving. Moving into this no-till system or this minimum till system, it's a lot easier than corn. I have not had trouble establishing a stand in no-till soybeans, and I don't have any special equipment. You saw my corn planter there is a Maximerge 2. It's like a John Deere, like 7300. It's old. I mean, there's nothing special. I just make sure that the disc openers are tight, bearings are good in the front, my gauge wheels, my packing wheels are doing what they're supposed to do, and it will cut through. If your disc openers are set correctly, they're touching, it will cut through some stuff, and it will do its job if your planter is set up correctly. I'm not the best at doing that. I've got to do a better job at that. But whenever I have been really particular about getting especially my disc openers to be set correctly to where they're touching each other, it'll cut through some trash really easy, especially when you're planting soybeans. I have not had any trouble planting soybeans into anything and everything. The trashiest of trash, I mean, just anything I can plant soybean into, I have had. You can get soybeans to make a stand, and a lot of people argue that the uniformity is just as important in soybeans, the emergence. And I'm not going to say that everything's going to emerge uniformly, but in my experience, even with a slightly non-uniform emergence in soybeans, still maintaining, an average yield. And maintaining an average yield in this situation is better than what we were doing before, because I'm making so much fewer passes across these fields. And my pigweed pressure is less because I'm not disturbing the soil. So I'll go back to what I was saying a minute ago. One of the things that I've gone around, where I said that I was plowing the corn after soybeans, is when I get into the soybeans after the corn, I just don't plow the middles. I'm relying on last year's corn beds and the fact that I plowed the middles last year to be a good enough bed and a good enough furrow for this year when I've got soybeans out there to not have to touch the soil. That has been my strategy the last couple of years, and I think it works because, once again, when I touch that soil, pigweeds just pop up out of everywhere. And if I don't touch the soil, my pigweed population, it's just been so much lower. I did put a little thing on here on the screen. I did have all dicamba beans this past year, and I sprayed less than half my acres with dicamba. And it wasn't because I was trying to, it wasn't for any special reason other than I just didn't need to. I didn't need to spend the money. I didn't need to go across the field again to spray dicamba, because with our pre-emerge activity out there, and the fact that we have not touched the soil, there's a lot of stubble on the ground there, as you can see. The pigweeds, they need sunlight. And they like to have a fresh bed, in my opinion. That's not scientific. They like fresh dirt. That's not scientific. But when you don't give them fresh dirt to come up through, and they have a little bit of shade that they're having to work through with that soybean stubble, with that corn stubble there, it makes it difficult. And I was able to spray, less than half my acres this year with dicamba and have a clean crop. Like I said, I'm no expert. I'm doing these things out of necessity because I'm trying to make it. We started from nothing, from scratch, and just tilling the ground to death was too much work and too much time and too much money for me, and that's why we got in this situation. And so far, I've learned some things about the situation, the minimum till, the no-till situation, that I really like, and I want to continue to try to do it and to improve the things that I'm doing to make the system work. So there's a picture there on the top of the screen of no-tilling soybeans straight into last year's row rice stubble, and as you can see, the beans had no trouble coming through that row rice stubble. I was pretty impressed with that. That's a pretty good amount of stubble there that they're coming through, but it was pretty impressive. I like that, and it makes for good pictures. Mm-hmm. The bottom picture is obviously going through corn stubble. If your GPS is perfect, which mine is not, then you will plant on either side of last year's corn stubble, as you can see. But I farm on 8 rows, and I don't have RTK, and so sometimes I'm planting soybeans right on top of some corn stubble, but the soybeans have been able to come up anyhow. So, but no-till also gives you some cool pictures to look at. The color contrast is pretty neat to look at.
It is amazing how they'll come up through that.
They will. The soybeans will come up through that, and so will the rice, and so will the wheat. If you were to toggle back and forth between the last slide and this slide, the soybeans on the top coincide with the soybeans on the top on the other slide, and the soybeans on the bottom here coincide with the soybeans on the bottom, if I'm not mistaken.
Like this.
Yeah. So you can tell that as the season progresses, the duff is disappearing. It looks awesome. These beans are average beans. They cut an average yield, but there's less trips across these fields. And some of the things that I was really worried about, and some of you may have already considered this and maybe already know this thing, but I was worried that when I plant when I plant soybeans straight into corn stalks from last year, I mean, the stalks are still standing up, you know, I mean, it's a lot of trash out there. Is that going to affect my draper header when I set that joker all the way on the ground and cut across this field cutting these soybeans? Is the corn stubble going to affect anything? Am I going to be balling up my sickle or something like that? And I have had zero trouble. I was really concerned about that at first. I have had zero trouble cutting these soybeans. My harvest efficiency on soybeans, I mean, you can still cut, I don't know, maybe I'm cutting too fast. You can still cut 4 or 5 miles an hour cutting these soybeans, and I wasn't having any trouble. And I would argue, not argue, but I'm under the impression that after the second or third year of no-till, the microbial activity is increasing, and so the chaff that is left out there, it disappears way quicker than what I thought it was going to disappear. It really does. And I got another picture in a minute where I drilled some wheat, where I'll talk more about that. Insect management has not changed really in soybeans. I am aware of the green bridge and being cognizant of the insects that may be there in a no-till situation. So I am aware of that. The only insect that I really see on a regular basis is going to be the black cutworm that kind of holds over from either our henbit or buttercup or you know what was growing there in the wintertime. But I haven't had it to demolish the stand, and I have not made an application to take care of any of these black cutworms. It's just something that's on my radar. Besides that, I haven't had any issue making the transition to no-till. I haven't had any issue with any special insects. Obviously, once you get a stand, then I mean the insect management is the same as a normal situation. The same thing with bollworms and stink bugs. I mean, I'm using Besiege or Prevathon for bollworms, and especially if we have red banded stink bugs, we're doing acephate plus bifenthrin to take care of our red banded stink bugs. I farmed some nematode infested ground. You can see there on the bottom left that I have to be very specific on variety selection. This specific picture was taken of a variety that was supposed to be 100% root knot resistant. It was not, and it just shows you how much of a challenge root knot nematodes can be, even to a variety that is supposed to be really tolerant to root knot nematodes. So it's there's some challenging ground in there, but with correct variety selection and as good of management practices as I can know, learn, and implement, that's what we will continue to do to manage insects and nematodes. In our wheat, I do grow some wheat, especially this year. I'm sure a lot of people have wheat this year because price got up to, you know, around $6, and we can normally make $6 wheat work. So I did plant some wheat this year. I've had wheat one other time in the past, and it spoiled me because it wasn't anything that I did, but we made some really good wheat on accident. and so I have continued to try to grow some wheat. The top picture is, well, both these pictures are my wheat stand this year. So this wheat was planted on November 15th, so not too long ago. November 15th wheat. The top one was planted after corn, obviously. There's some corn trash in the picture there. No-tilled with my same drill that I plant my rice with into the corn. Has no trouble. The wheat has no trouble. I just don't try to plant it too deep, you know, because it's going to be cold down there. But anyways, the bottom picture I think is really interesting. That's why I wanted to include it. I was talking about the microbial activity a few minutes ago. That field was in soybeans 2 years ago. I no-tilled it into corn last year. It was full of corn stalks when I planted soybeans this year, and I just cut the soybeans and planted the wheat. And what I wanted to make a point for everyone to see is that that was in corn last year, and I have done nothing to the field except for drive across it with harvest equipment, and you cannot see a stalk or a cob of corn on that field. I mean, it's easy to get away with not seeing soybean stubble because you don't have a whole lot of plant mass laying on the ground anyways. But there's a lot of corn stubble out there after a corn crop. And that's 1 year after a corn crop doing absolutely nothing except for planting soybeans right into the trash, harvesting the soybeans, and planting wheat right into the soybean stubble. And the microbial activity, I would contend, is taking care of that corn stubble much quicker than what I expected. And that's what I meant to say a minute ago.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't tell that there was corn in that field a year ago. I mean, there's no stalk, there's no cob left, it's gone. And we didn't do anything to it. So I'm taking that into consideration when it comes to really how the soil is rebounding into a no-till. I'll take a step back here for a second. I have noticed that the first year that I try to implement no-till into a field, I feel like I have compaction problems. I don't have just that grow off ability where the soybeans or the corn or the rice just grows off early in the year like I really feel like it should. It seems stunted. And this is not scientific. This is just observation. The next year, I seem to not have that trouble. I'm going to attribute a lot of that to compaction, to many years of conventional tillage where we're accidentally developing a hard pan, 6 inches under the ground or something like that. And the first year that you go and you don't till that hard pan, that first year root system, I think, is having a little bit of tough time penetrating that artificial, I'm going to call it artificial hard pan, 6 or 8 inches under the surface or something like that. I don't have all the answers for how to combat that. Maybe a chisel plow or something like that to combat that going into no-till. My second year in the same field with another no-till crop, I have definitely seen improvement, but by the third year, it's like the crop has a boost at the beginning of the season. The soil is so much more mellow, and it doesn't have as much issue, doesn't have as much trouble coming out of the ground. I don't have as many soybean plants breaking their neck trying to come out of the soil. I don't have as many crusting issues, something like that. And I really start noticing that on year 2 and especially on year 3. So for people who may want to try to dabble in no-till one field, my experience was I don't think the first year did it justice. That's why I continued to do it. I continued to do it after the first year because I felt like that my crops were stunted at the beginning of the year, and I attributed it to compaction. Now, that may not have been the actual case. That was my experience and my observation, and so someone else may have a different experience, but that's kind of what I feel like was going on. So not giving up on it the first year allowed me to have that second and third year. I'm glad that I did because that third year, I really feel like that we're starting to see benefits from this accidental no-till system out of necessity. And on the wheat, I need to hit these other bullet points. I am using seed treatments on this wheat.
Other crops too, right?
I'm using seed treatments on all of my crops. I'm not stepchilding this wheat. I need the wheat to make money. I don't want to just have wheat just to have something else to do in the wintertime. So I need the wheat to do well, and so I'm treating it like it's supposed to be treated, in my opinion. I'm putting out the fertilizer, I'm putting out the herbicides that the wheat needs in order to make a good yield so that I can make a profit, because I don't want to just do a whole bunch of work during the wintertime for nothing. Yeah. I'd rather be deer hunting. I'm not perfect. And sometimes we like spill like a whole truckload of soybeans on the ground. We got to clean up with buckets. I didn't want this presentation to go by and then everybody think that I'm living the high life and farming. No, we still make plenty of mistakes, and we cleaned a lot of that up with buckets. This was this year. Man, this is my 9870 that I got all the way stuck. So I wanted to put that in there to really make some of you other guys feel good about yourselves, because I felt terrible after this thing. I was driving, so can't blame it on anybody else. But it's not a perfect situation out there. Don't go away from this presentation thinking that I've really got it all figured out, because I absolutely don't. I still can get stuff stuck. And we are not where we want to be, but we are making progress. I do have a couple pieces of advice, and I'm not really qualified to be giving advice. I've only been doing this for a few years, and I'm young. But I've learned the hard way not to try to save money by cutting fertility, because if we don't give the plant what it needs, it is not going to give us what we need. I don't know. It's not been worth it to me. I mean, I have shot myself in the foot too many times, because fertilize is the easiest thing to say no to, and you don't spend the money. I mean, it's like, well, I just won't put it out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an easy decision. It's like, I'm just not going to put it out. And so, bam, just save myself $20,000. But that's not really the case, because we lose that $20,000 in yield, no doubt about it. Now, that's just an arbitrary number, but we definitely lose it in yield, no doubt about it. I have shot myself in the foot too many times to try to save money cutting fertility. I take soil samples, and I need to put out what the crop needs, or else it's not going to give me what I need at the end of the year. I feel like as farmers, myself included, we are already spending the minimum amount on herbicide and insecticides that we can get away with. I don't really think that we can spend too much less money on herbicides and insecticides than what we do. I mean, I'm a farmer, and I drive around farmland all the time because I want to see what other people are doing. And most people have a relatively clean crop. And we're all doing it for the least amount of money that we can get away with. I mean, in rice, for example, I didn't mention this earlier, but I think that my herbicide cost is running me about $100 an acre. Sometimes I can get away with $80 an acre, but I don't really think it's realistic to have a clean rice crop for less than $80 an acre. I know people can do it for 50 or 60, and more power to you. I haven't been able to really do it consistently at $50 or $60. And what if something doesn't work? It's $40 an acre nearly every time we go across the field putting out rice herbicide. And so if you put out $80 worth of herbicide and you think you're good to go, and you got to make a salvage treatment, and I know people don't want to hear this, but we use Clincher and Rebel X and these others as salvage treatments. Well, it's going to cost us another $40.
Revenge spray.
Yeah, and so you went from a good price of $80 an acre to now you're at $120 an acre. Well, that really cancels out all the fields that you had at 60. So just wanted to throw that in there. We're already doing the best job we can do, in my opinion, to spend the least amount of money that we can get away with on herbicides and insecticides. I also want to mention that on all of my crops, I use the Cadillac seed treatment. I want as much help getting my crop out of the ground as I can possibly get. So it's going to have insecticide, fungicide, sometimes zinc, whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm going to put the Cadillac treatment on my seed so that, as we go to the next slide, so that I can possibly lower my seed cost. I really feel like I said a minute ago, that we don't need to shoot ourselves in the foot by cutting our fertility. And we're already putting out the least amount we can do herbicide and insecticide wise, in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is try to lower my seed costs. And to lower my seed costs, I'm going to be putting out less seed. I'm just going down here on the list a little bit to the last one because that's where I started here. But I'm going to try some ultra low seeding rates in all crops. I'm not going to do it on a big scale, especially in corn, because it's probably not going to work in corn. But, you know, we'll try it on a very, very small scale. But in soybeans, you know, I have been planting into trash, into all this stubble at 150,000 seeds per acre. And sometimes I'm getting 150,000 plant stand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I don't need 150,000 plants to achieve 100% of my yield potential. And I'm not doing anything special. This is a 25-25P Great Plains drill. There's nothing special. Just like I said on the corn planter, I'm just making sure that my disc openers and my closing wheels and my gauge wheels are set the best I can, and it will plant into some trash and give you or give me a stand because it has done it. So I'm going to be lowering my seed rates, especially in soybeans. I have tried down into the 125, 130,000 range and still got a good stand over 100,000. In my experience, you know, I'm very comfortable with saying that 100,000 plants achieves us 100% of our yield opportunity in soybeans. And I think that many people would say you could go even lower than that, 80 or 75. So if we're around 100, I feel comfortable with that. And I did the math. My wife and I were doing the math after it was all said and done this year about our seed costs. We figured that we could have reasonably cut our seed costs down and still put out a reasonable amount of seed, still giving us in all 4 crops a reasonable chance to establish a 100% yield potential stand while saving $50,000 in seed alone. And so that's something I really want to consider for myself going forward, because do I need to put out 150,000 seeds if I really only need a final stand of 100,000? That's just one example. In hybrid, a lot of times I was planting, you know, 25 to 27 pounds of hybrid in row rice, and I was getting like, you know, like a 12 or 14 plants per square foot stand. And that's more than what we need. I mean, after all, if we abide by the university recommendations, we're going to keep a stand if it's at 3 plants per square foot. So, I mean, why am I planting 14?
Mm-hmm.
So I have tried that. I've gone down to like 18 pounds as opposed to 25 pounds or 22.5 pounds. The difference between 18 pounds and 25 pounds of Rice Tech seed per acre is like astronomical. I mean, it is so much money of a difference. And I mean, I don't know if Rice Tech wants me to say that, but I've tried to plant it at lower seeding rates. You can still get a stand, a keepable stand, you know, of more than 3 plants per square foot at a lower seeding rate than 25, than 22.5. I've done it at 18. I'm sure you could do it lower than that. And that's significant money savings. Like I said, I really feel like after this year was all said and done, that with the low populations that I tried and saw what they were capable of doing, I could have reasonably saved $50,000 across my operation just in seed costs alone by planting a lower seed rate that wasn't going to shoot myself in the foot, but was still going to give me optimum yield potential. I do want to dabble in some cover crops. I think it's cool. I think there's some cool things that you can do there. I don't know much about it. I listen to other people talk about it, so I don't have any experience. I'm going to dabble in it. Yeah, I'm going to have to scout it. I am going to try some intercropping this coming year. Never tried it before. Who knows? I'm not going to do it across the whole farm. Yeah. But I want to see if I can increase corn yields by increasing our light interception, kind of taking advantage of the edge effect in corn, except for a lot more rows, because there's going to be space in between the passes of corn. I'm going to probably do like a 8-row strips or 16-row strips, because I farm on 8-row equipment, and then fill in the gaps with soybeans, and then a couple passes away do more corn strips, and see if I can get the light interception inside the corn canopy to increase yield by just better photosynthesis. I mean having more light in the corn canopy. I don't foresee that it's going to negatively or positively affect soybeans when they're intercrop with corn. I think it's going to be about the same either way, but hopefully we can see an advantage to corn because of light interception. And like I said at the very beginning, a major improvement that I need to make is to somehow ensure that my seed placement in corn is uniform, because that causes a non-uniform stand if it's not uniform seed placement, and that causes problems when it comes to pollination, and you lose yield that way. So I have a lot of things to improve, a lot of things to try. I'm excited to do it. I have a little bit of a scientific background. These things to me are really fun to try new things, and with the help of smarter people than me, we will make some advances in southeastern Arkansas agriculture.
You're not talking about me being one of those smarter people.
I'm hoping.
But you did have a good piece of advice you told me earlier.
What's that?
Be nice to folks.
Oh, yes. I have learned, and this goes for every walk of life. If you are nice to people, you can get a long ways. People have been super nice to me, helping me along. I want to be able to help people like they have helped me. I mean, I owe so many people so many things that's not money. They have just been so helpful to me. If you are not a butthole to people, you can really make a lot of advances in the farming community. I genuinely believe that. And after all, I'm a born again child of God, and I want to do justice to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I want to paint an accurate picture of who Jesus is. And so I'm gonna try to be nice to people. And I have learned that people are nice to you in return, and they will help you out when you get into a pinch. I've been there, and people have helped me out.
Yeah. All right, Brett. Well, thank you very much. We'll move on to my presentation here in a minute.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Thrash. I'm an extension entomologist with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about soybean insect management today. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of what happened to the red-banded stink bugs this year. By all indications, it kind of looked like they were going to be a pretty serious problem in Arkansas this year. However, it really turned out that they weren't too bad, not near as bad as what we thought they were going to be. Every year we do these ditch bank surveys where we try to find some crimson clover, and we go and sweep these ditches, and we try to kind of figure out how many red-banded stink bugs overwintered in Arkansas this past year. And by all indications, you know, we had quite a few red-banded stink bugs that we were finding this spring. But, you know, we really didn't have near as much crimson clover as we did in 2017. To us, it didn't seem like. 2017, there was a lot of crimson clover, and there was also a lot of red-banded stink bugs that overwintered in Arkansas. But our numbers look the same kind of as they did in 2017, just maybe less crimson clover out there. So that might have been one of the problems why we did not see as many red-banded stink bugs later on in the growing season. Something else that might have been an issue is that Louisiana's planting was delayed along with Arkansas's. But what that meant was that also their harvest was delayed. And you can see these lines on this graph. These are the percent planted in Arkansas, the percent acres planted. And the blue line is 2017 and the red line is 2020.
You can see we were a couple weeks behind or Louisiana was, in their planting. So they also had a delayed harvest. And what that means is that the red-banded stink bugs were likely kind of getting a little later moving into Arkansas. Usually whenever Louisiana starts harvesting their soybeans, the red-banded stink bugs move farther north to find suitable host to feed on. So as more and more soybeans get harvested in Louisiana, those red-bandeds move more and more into Arkansas trying to find soybeans that are at a good growth stage to feed on. So that might have been part of what it kind of explained what happened to the red-banded stink bugs this year. Next thing I kind of want to move into is thresholds. This is something that everybody knows is out there. We have thresholds for most of our insect pests out there, but not everybody knows really what they are or how they work. So if you look at this graph, it's kind of an explanation of how economic threshold and what an economic injury level is. So over here on our y-axis, we have our pest infestation level, so the number of bugs out there in the field. And then across the x-axis, across the bottom, we have time. This green kind of represents a insect level over time, so our insect numbers. And as they increase, they'll surpass our economic threshold. And if we don't do anything, if we don't treat for them, they'll keep going right on past the economic injury level. Now, economic injury level is equal to how much damage an insect would cause out there in the field if left unchecked. It's equal to the cost of control. So that's what the economic injury level is. Now, an economic threshold is usually set somewhere below that economic injury level. So, for instance, our bollworm threshold is set at about 75% of what our economic injury level is. So you still have 25% gap before you're actually starting to lose any yield from those bollworms out there in the field. And this kind of represents what happens, you know, once we reach an economic threshold. If we decide to spray whatever insect might be out there in the field, the population kind of drops off and then stays below the economic threshold, you know, throughout the rest of the growing season. But there are problems with our economic thresholds. Many times they're not really based on economics. You know, if a soybean is at $10 whenever a threshold was made, once a soybean goes up to $12 per bushel, you know, some thresholds don't change based on that number. So that's an issue. It's not really based on economics. They also some of them don't take into account how much an insecticide cost at the time of application. Many of them are static. And a lot of times they also don't take into account sub-threshold populations over time. So, you know, what if I have half a threshold for 3 weeks in a row? And so there are some issues with some of our economic thresholds. This threshold is for a corn earworm in soybeans. And this was developed by the Mid-South Entomologist Working Group. So entomologists in Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi all work together to come up with this threshold. And it does a better job of kind of representing what a threshold should. So it actually does take into account the crop value. So you look over here and we've got anywhere from $6 soybeans all the way up to $15 soybeans. And across the top, we have our control cost in dollars per acre. And so you add how much the insecticide cost plus how much your application costs are going to be. So let's say soybeans are at $12 like they are right now, and it's going to cost me $20 to spray. So that means our threshold is going to be at 8.2. So basically 8 corn earworms per 25 sweeps. So that's a step in the right direction for a threshold. is it changes based on economics. So how do we come up with those numbers? Well, first we got to figure out an economic injury level. And this is the formula that we use to come up with these thresholds. So E is our economic injury level, C is our cost of control, V is value, I is injury units per pest, D is damage per unit of insect injury, and K is reduction in injury by control. But for our purposes, we can simplify this a little bit and combine the injury and damage. So our cost and control is in dollars per acre. Our value is in dollars per bushel, and our damage is the damage per insect per 25 sweeps. So how many bushels per acre per insect per 25 sweeps? And then K is something that we haven't talked about yet, but that's our reduction in injury by control. So basically what percent control you're getting of a specific insect. So let's put a few numbers to this. First off, like I said, we hadn't talked about our percent control. And so what happens to our economic injury level whenever our percent control changes? So over here, we have our control cost, $20 per acre versus $10 per acre if you decide to go with a cheaper insecticide. And over here, this is what we consider our losses. We use the value, the damage per worm, and the percent control to evaluate how much loss we're getting after an application. So let's say we go with a $20 insecticide. So our control cost is $20. Then over here on the right side, let's say we use that expensive insecticide that costs $20 and we control 100% of the worms out in the field. So that means we have 0% loss associated with the worms that are left out there in the soybean field. Now, if we go with a cheaper insecticide, say it's $10 for application plus the insecticide, but then we're only getting 50% control. So we're leaving 7 worms out there in the field. So 7 times 0.14 times 10 equals approximately $10 worth of soybeans that they're still eating out there in the field. So you sprayed $10 worth of insecticide, but you're also leaving enough worms out there to eat $10 worth of soybeans. So you would have been better off probably going just with a $20 insecticide, and you don't have to worry about what you're leaving out there in the field. So that's why over here our economic injury level stays the same because you have reduced control and you have reduced control cost. So our economic injury level is the same even though our control costs are different. So when we look back at this threshold, that's one of the things that is not taken into account with our control cost and our crop value. In this chart assumes 100% control with your insecticide. So if you're not taking into account something you might get 70% control with it, these numbers are going to be off. And something I also need to mention is, you notice once we get to where our control costs are so low and our crop value gets really high, we have a basement threshold of 5 worms per 25 sweeps. And the reason that bottoms out at 5 is because at that level, soybeans are able to compensate for injury that only 5 worms are out in the field eating. Soybeans can compensate for low levels of worm damage. So really there's no need in spraying below 5 worms per 25 sweeps. So what happens to our threshold? Well, we're going to change the equation just a little bit to give a real life kind of example. So let's say we have 28 worms out in our field. So the number of worms out in the field went up. We've got 28 per 25 sweeps. Well, we got the same control cost, $20 at the top, $10 at the bottom. And the only thing that's changed over here in our losses is that we have more worms out that are going to be left out there in the field. So whenever we look at this equation with more worms, we have $20 control cost up here on the top, and we still have $0 in losses whenever we use a good quality insecticide that controls basically 100% of the worms out there in the field. So you still got $20 in cost. Well, whenever you move to a cheaper insecticide that might not do as good might not have near as good a control as the more expensive insecticide, you're going to be leaving worms out there in the field. So now you're leaving $21 out there in the field. If you leave half those worms, if you leave 14 worms out in the field, that's still way above our economic threshold, our economic injury level. And those worms are really still going to be causing you quite a bit of damage out there in the field. So really now you've got $31 tied up in losses plus cost versus the $20 that would have, saved you some money in the long run if you would have went with a more effective insecticide. So let's say you got improved control. Let's say, well, Ben, I might be getting 80% control out there in the field. Okay, well, you're leaving 6 worms out there in the field. So you're leaving a little less. You're leaving less worms out there with this cheaper insecticide. So how does that compare? So I've got $10 in control cost. I'm leaving 6 worms out there. So they're still eating about $8.40 worth of soybeans by leaving those 6 out there. And so really you're at about $18.40 in your losses plus your cost, when if you would have went with the more expensive insecticide, you would have been at $20 and you wouldn't have had any more additional losses. So you would have been saving yourself about $1.60 by spraying by spraying the cheaper insecticide. But something you also have to worry about is, getting reinfested with some cheaper insecticides. But we'll talk about that here in a minute. So what if soybean value goes up to $12 per acre like it has now? Soybeans aren't at $10, they're at $12 now. Okay, well, if we have our $10 control cost down here on the bottom, our value goes up with our soybeans, and we still get 80% control. We're leaving 6 worms out there in the field. Well, now, because soybean value went up, now they're eating about $10 worth of soybeans. Even those 6 worms are now, instead of eating $8 worth of soybeans, they're eating $10 worth of soybeans. So now you're really not doing yourself any favors by going with the cheaper insecticide versus one that would provide much better control, even though it costs a little bit more. Now, like I said before, the repeat application is really where these cheaper insecticides that aren't as effective as a more expensive one can really start to get in your pocketbook. You may think you're doing yourself a favor by going with a cheaper insecticide, but you really might not be in the long run, and you might not know it. So, as I said before, if you're getting 80% control and you're leaving about $8.40 out there on the table of soybeans that these 6 worms are out there eating, if you got to make a repeat application, well, now you're at the same control cost as you would have been going with the more expensive insecticide, plus you're leaving a total of 12 worms out there. So you're leaving 6 the first time, you're leaving 6 the second time. And so now they're eating about $16.80 worth the soybeans out there in the field, because you didn't get rid of all of them. Plus you have an extra $10 in control cost. So now you're at $36.80 instead of applying a $20 control cost of a very effective insecticide. So this is something just to think about whenever you decide to try to save a little bit of money on an insecticide application by going with a cheaper product that might not provide near as good a control. You know, it's your decision, but it's something to think about. It's just something I want you to be aware about, is that if you're not getting as good of control with the insecticide as you could be, you know, you might be leaving a little money out there on the table. All right, so now I'm going to move into cover crops. So we've been doing a cover crop trial looking at seed treatments across several different covers. This is data combined from tests in 2019 and 2020. So over here on our y-axis, we have our yield in bushels per acre. And across the bottom, we have our 4 cover crops that we tested. We had a blend, a fallow, Austrian winter pea, and a cereal rye. And you can see that between our blend, our Austrian winter pea, and our rye, we had a little bit of a yield bump over our fallow alone. And I kind of associate that with some elimination of some soil crusting early in the season, where you had a little bit of a reduced stand in this fallow. We didn't really have significant insect populations in either of these trials, but none of these cover crops really separated from our fallow treatment. All right, now if we look at our insecticide seed treatments here across the bottom, we tested Cruiser, Cruiser plus Avicta, Cruiser plus Fortenza, and a fungicide-only Chet. Well, all 3 of our fungicide, or all 3 of our insecticide combinations did yield greater than our fungicide-only seed treatment. And when we look at it, across each of our crops, we look at it in our blend, our fallow, our Austrian winter pea, and our cereal rye. We got a little bit of a yield bump by using an insecticide seed treatment in all 3, regardless of whether we had a cover crop or not. We still had a little bit of a yield bump from the addition of an insecticide seed treatment. And what that looks like whenever we combine it together, and we're looking at whether you just had a fungicide or it didn't matter which insecticide seed treatment, there was no separation that we had yet. But we got about a 2 bushel yield increase in both of these trials each year, and they separated. So you can see this is some pictures from our cover crop trial this year. And over here on the left side, this was one of our fungicide seed treatments. I mean, I wouldn't treat for these bean leaf beetles that we had out here in the field early in the season. You can see a little bit of those shot holes in our leaves. And over here, we had one of our insecticide seed treatments. You can see it protected those soybeans pretty well. But really, there was not a significant amount of insect injury out there in our cover crops either year. I wish I could have cover crops that looked like these. These photos are courtesy of Trent Roberts. I believe, if I remember correctly, these were pictures he sent me from the Kibler Research Station. He had an infestation. He said he had some Japanese beetles and grasshoppers out here was the only things that he could find out here in his cover crop study. But over here on the left, you can see that the insecticide seed treatments did a really good job of protecting from those Japanese beetles. Over here on the right side, I mean, you can see they hammered those soybeans pretty well. But one of the biggest things I want to emphasize about cover crops is it's really imperative, if you're going to have a cover crop, is to scout. These were, again, some of Trent Roberts' cover crop trials down in South Arkansas, and he was able to get insects. I don't know why his entomologist can't seem to get any insects in any of our cover crops, but he had a pretty significant infestation of armyworms. And if you would have planted into that without scouting or planted into it green, you know, when those soybeans emerged, those armyworms would have really hammered those little soybeans. And the best course of action in these cover crops is to burn them down about 3 weeks before you're going to plant into your cover. And that's to give time for those insect pests that are still out there in the field to die. So if they don't have anything to eat on for 3 weeks after you burned it down, they'll just die. And, another course of action is you could go out there and you could make an insecticide application to try and kill these armyworms out here in the out there in the cover crop right after you planted. Now the issue with that is that an insecticide seed treatment would not have controlled these worms, or most of our insecticide seed treatments wouldn't. A neonic wouldn't. But we've seen situations where a insecticide application is not able to penetrate that thick mat of cover that a cover crop's providing, and you really are getting poor control with your insecticides that you're applying out there in the field. I recall one case of a guy that actually called Gus from, I think he was over in North Carolina, and he had pea leaf weevils. And the guy had planted soybeans into a Austrian winter pea cover crop, and he was not able to get the pea leaf weevils under control with an insecticide application. He sprayed, if I remember correctly, 3 times and still had those pea weevils out there hammering a soybean crop. Like he was going to lose his crop because he cannot get these pea weevils under control. And that's really why the best course of action is to burn down your cover crop and give them at least 3 weeks before you plant into it. Because even in some situations, an insecticide might not be able to provide effective enough control to get some pest under control. So something we saw this year, we saw quite a bit of disease in some of our insect pests. Down here you can see bollworm with some fungus, and here's some soybean looper infected with virus. Here's a three-cornered alfalfa hopper infected with Bavaria bassiana, and here's another corn earworm infected with fungus. Now, that's really good for a grower out there in the field. Whenever a disease or any beneficial out there helps to control insects, we love that. But why did we see all this disease this year? Well, it's because we had a pretty good cool front. These pictures are actually taken in a field of ours at Lexa, just south of Marianna. And you can see that we had a pretty good cold front going in right here. We had a pretty good drop in our temperatures, as well as some pretty rainy conditions, what really helped to promote some of these pathogens. The plant pathologists always kind of show this. It's the disease triangle, which pertains to plants, but it also pertains to intimate pathogens. So we have our host, our insect, we have our pathogen, so our disease that's out there, and then we have the environment. And so these cool, rainy conditions really promoted a bunch of disease out there, and we saw some bollworm populations drop off pretty rapidly, as well as some soybean loopers. So I just kind of want to mention that because in the future, if you've got low infestation of bollworms or soybean loopers or some other pest out there in the field, and you see these these cold, wet temperatures that are going to come in fairly rapidly, and you're not in any real rush to treat. If you're just kind of watching a population of worms or anything, this might be something you look for in the future. If you see in the forecast that we've got these cool, wet temperatures, you might just hold off and see if one of these diseases will help you out and control your pest. That's especially true with soybean loopers. It seems to happen every year. We get cool, wet conditions. Soybean loopers crash especially hard. Bollworms, this is really kind of the first time that I've seen bollworms crash as hard as they did. And this is actually that trial. You can see we got a good, we have our bollworms per 25 sweeps over here on our y-axis, and then our treatments over here on our x-axis. And you can look at 3, 6, and what was supposed to be a 14-day application, but you don't see a single worm out here on the 14-day applications. And that was actually because, or a 14-day scouting, but that was actually because we had these cold, wet conditions that really promoted that disease, and it literally killed all the bollworms out of these plots. But you can see in this trial, pretty much everything provided pretty good control. Intrepid was a little slow. This is an extremely high rate of Intrepid. This is the maximum rate. And Intrepid alone's never been a really good bollworm product. But you can see really every other treatment did a pretty decent job of controlling bollworms in this test. Now this was another bollworm efficacy test that we had down in Tiller, and we have 4-day, 11-day, 17, and 24-day counts on these. And you can see we had a pretty good rise. We had a pretty good population of bollworms that continued to rise out to 17 days after application. All Prevathon and Besiege provided excellent control of bollworms in our soybean trial. Intrepid Edge provided a really good control. However, Intrepid Edge has a little bit, has shorter residual control than either of these diamide insecticides. So you see, we started to get worms back in our, Intrepid Edge plots. However, that cold front came through and really started killing our bollworms in our field at 24 days after application. We actually were fortunate enough to get some loopers in that same test that we were counting bollworms in. They came in about 11 days after application. And we were catching about 1 looper every other sweep. And really, Prevathon and Besiege, they provided decent control of these loopers out here. Besiege, since it has the pyrethroid out there, those soybean loopers really don't like pyrethroids. And you'll see that again on the next slide. But Intrepid Edge, man, is an excellent product for soybean loopers. However, once we start getting 17 and 24 days out, like I said, the residual control isn't as good as some of these diamide insecticides. Although on the front end, it really does provide better control than Prevathon and Besiege, or more consistent control. Here's another looper efficacy trial, and you can see, Intrepid Edge absolutely zeroed out our looper populations. Denim provided good control. Besiege and Prevathon plus Brigade provided pretty good control of our loopers in Mariana. But like I was saying before, my soybean loopers really do not like pyrethroid insecticides. And Hero is a combination of bifenthrin and zeta-cypermethrin. And you can see that we actually increased our populations over our untreated check whenever we sprayed a pyrethroid out there. And it really does not help us out controlling soybean loopers. So let's take a minute. We'll talk about, we'll kind of finish up talking about heligen. Heligen's usage in Arkansas was about 130,000 acres in 2020. It was a little bit less than it was in 2019, but it kind of seemed like our bollworms might have been just a little bit down. But our complaints in 2020 were about 1/10 of what they were in 2019. So what that tells me is that people are really starting to figure out where this product fits. They're not putting it in situations where it's not going to work. And so I think people are getting more confidence with this product and are keeping it in the situations where it's going to work. So to me, that's a pretty good sign. I just want to remind everybody, as those as bollworms get a little larger, they get harder and harder to kill with heligen. So we want to make sure to spray bollworms, if you're going to use heligen, as small as you can get them. Bollworms eat about 10% of what they're going to consume in their lifetime in their first through the fourth instar. But in their fifth and sixth instar, they consume 90% of what they're going to eat their whole entire larval lifetime. So whenever we use this product, we really want to target these small worms and stop them, because it is a biological and it takes a few days to kill these bollworms. We want to stop them before they get into this 90%. So if you think about it in terms of how many bushels, they're eating and what economic impact that's going to cost, is a worm is going to eat about $1.53, one worm per 25 sweeps out there, not one worm total, one larvae per 25 sweeps is equal to about $1.53 loss. They're going to eat about $1.53 worth of soybeans per acre. And so if you think about that in monetary terms, these first through fourth instar bollworms are really only eating about 15 cents worth of soybeans out there, whereas these fifth and sixth instars, these big snakes, are eating about $1.38 worth of soybeans. And remember, these numbers are based on $10 soybeans. And so you really want to stop those bollworms before they get to that $1.38. So remember, timing is very crucial with this product. You want to hit them early, before they get to third instar, before they get a half an inch. A quarter inch is even better. But if you can hit them before they get a half an inch long, you're doing okay. And remember, whenever you use something like heligen, you may go out there and you may find a few damaged pods out there in the field, or if you don't get to a field in time, you may find a few damaged pods. But this is some research that we did a while back, and what we did is we removed 50% of the fruiting structures. So at R2, we removed 50% of the flowers on a soybean plant. This is all by hand. At R3, we removed 50% of the pods. At R4, we removed 50% of the pods, and R5.5, we removed 50% of the pods. Well, we didn't even see a significant difference in removing half of the fruit on the soybean plant all the way up until we got to R5.5. And so I'm not telling you to go out there and let, bollworms eat half the fruit off your soybeans. That's dumb. But what I'm saying is that if you go out and you find a few damaged pods, just remember that those soybean plants can really do some serious compensating. Although your maturity might be delayed, but they can do some serious compensating for a little bit of injury out there in the field. So don't freak out over just a little bit of pod damage. If you got any questions, feel free to call me or Gus or Nick or Glenn. These are our numbers up here. Feel free to email us, text us, send us pictures. We ID insects all the time. We'd like to thank the Arkansas Soybean Promotion Board for funding this research. And thanks for your time.